Starting. Oh, there we go. We're in. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today with my friend Piero San Giorgio. He is an author, and would I be? Well, I see you as a philosopher, but your job is you're a survivalist. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess I'm many things. Of course, I'm a father. I'm a citizen of Switzerland. I'm a man. Or so I think I am these days. You never know. And yeah, I try to be a lot of things, and among these things is a survivalist, which for me the definition is that if you want to be responsible of your life and of the people you care for, you need to plan for whatever future is happening. And if you foresee the future to be difficult, as I do, well, then you need to plan for it. And usually people who do that are called today a survivalist.
Sure. When I met you and when we were first talking, this was before the plague had begun, and even before that, I think we sort of caught each other's attention because after I'd watched you speak, I spoke to a smaller group and I said, Piero has just understated everything. I'm sure, like, I see this guy talking about the supply chain, and you were being kind to the audience. You were really giving them the soft version. Could you just give people a brief description of what you were talking about on the day that put us together?
Yes, well, basically, the predicament that I fell into, or that I thought of a few years back, was that we are starting to be at the convergence of many very heavy crises. The first one is that we grew from, in 1 century, from 2 to 8 billion people.
Yeah.
That has a big impact on how we use resources, how we destroy the environment, or actually how we don't harness it correctly for the long term. And we happen to use, especially oil, petrol, cheap and fantastic usable energy that oil is, to fund and finance an incredible growth, which really was the story of the industrial revolutions, first and second, and then the 20th century. But eventually, starting in the 70s and 80s, that growth started to slow down, and I believe, in fact, actually stopped. And it had to be continued through the creation of basically fake money, fake printing money out of central banks. And increasing that monetary mass enabled us the illusion of keeping growing, while the reality is that we don't really have real wealth creation. And what we do is we are consuming natural resources faster than they can renew themselves. And with that, we are depleting our ability to sustain equilibrium. In fact, we have by far overshooted that ability to go beyond our capacities every year to renew resources. So what this means is that we are living on borrowed time and borrowed money, which means that eventually we're going to collapse, because this is the law of entropy. Now, some people have been saying this since the 70s, and they've been correct, in fact, by predicting that this would happen. Now, of course, we've had the North Sea oil, we had shale oil that enabled us to keep growing a little bit more. But this is like, it's like we have there's this joke going around that it's like we're like mice being happy to discover that we can eat the cereal box once the cereals inside the box are finished. So say, hey, we can also eat the box. But that's where we are. We're at the end of resources. And of course, a lot of people will always say, yeah, but we can invent new things, new technologies. Yeah. But I'm almost 50. I've heard this all my life. Fusion, making oil out of algae and whatever. I've heard this since I was a kid. I still don't see that. Electric cars, which are more expensive and more energy.
And damage the environment more as well, I just found out.
And, the people say, oh, but renewables. Yeah, but how do you build those titanium blades for the wind farms? I mean, you don't make them with a little coal fire on the side. All this requires heavy industry, interconnected supply chains. And I predicted in 2010 with my first book, which was an international bestseller, that by 2020 to 2022, this was my calculation. Of course, it doesn't mean anything. It could be later. It could be 10 years from now, or it could be 5 years from now.
But not outside of our lifetime, in the foreseeable future.
This is now. We are starting to hit the convergence of all these problems and crises, financial, ecological, population growth, resources being depleted. And you can add to this the philosophical and spiritual crisis, where we have no aim for future. What's the meaning of life? Watching Netflix and
wanking
on porn and playing on video games. I mean, this makes no sense. And at the same time, we have a growing number of people from other places who want to do the same as us, but there are just 7 billion of them, and they're growing and they overflow, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to function for very long. And so I predicted this crisis will bring to the point of the inability to treat. We could treat one crisis after the other in sequence if we put all our resources and minds. But now we have so many crises coming together at the same time, and this recent virus crisis. Can we even say virus before shutting down the videos today? In my own videos, I call this the Chinese cat, because everyone loves cat, and the algorithm will think you're actually talking nonsense about little kitties. But in fact, the Chinese cat, and everyone who listens to me knows what we're talking about. But, and this lab-made cat, which came out by accident, I believe, has shown that not only did we manage this crisis extremely bad, but it showed that the infrastructure and the supply chains are already stretched to the maximum, and everything is priced and organized for perfection. So as you put the proverbial grain of sand in the system, suddenly you have bigger problems, and the system is not that easily able to reconstruct itself. And now we didn't put just a grain of sand. We stopped the whole economy for 2 months. First in China for a month, and then the rest of the world for 2 months. Now, restarting something like that is going to be very hard, if not impossible, for air travel, tourism, hotels. This is like 20 or 25% of the economy who just have been gone. I was discussing at lunch today with a guy who owns one of the biggest shipping companies in the world out of Geneva. These guys used to make $10 billion a week in revenue. Okay?
10 billion?
$10 billion.
Can I be friends with him, please?
Of course. Well, wait till the end of the story.
Okay.
The problem is, because you can imagine shipping, cruise ships. You can imagine just the maintenance cost, the fixed cost of those industries. Yeah. Now suddenly you have 0 passengers. You have very much less freight that is carried on the cargo ships. Sure. There's still a lot, but it's much less than before. So you can imagine the fixed cost that these guys have to finance every month, because the margins are okay, but you have fixed costs. Yeah. So as long as you go on working, you can make your 10, 15% margin. But once you have 0, it's not that you don't make those 15%. You have to finance the whole fixed cost every month. And
you're paying to work, basically.
They had to fire 90% of the employees, because that's it. So that's a lot of people.
Yes.
But the fixed costs still remain to manage the ships so that they don't rust. Otherwise, they become hulks of rust and you have to pay for storing them somewhere. You cannot just sink them in the sea.
Yes.
There is a huge cost to build them and maintain them. And these things have a life of 30, 40 years. So suddenly you have inertia of the economy of costs, and you have no revenues for 1, 2, 3 months. And then it's going to slow start very, very lower than it used to be. Sorry for my English, but you can imagine, and that's one industry, and you can do this for airlines, for hotel chains, and for the, let's say, more mundane people like us, people who have little groceries, little shops, suddenly for 2 months, you don't have the cash flow. How can you pay your salary, your employees, if you have the rent? and so of course the states, they go full socialist retard, saying, okay, while we're at it, we're going to pay everyone a couple of a months of salary or 2 months of salary. But this can't go on forever, because if you pay everyone not to work, eventually the reality hits you, is that the real, because you can make fake money and you can imagine all sorts of shenanigans for people to get free money from everywhere for not working.
Yeah.
But eventually you need the resources to make all of this go around. And the guys who make oil, they want to be paid. And below a certain amount, they don't produce. They're shutting down oil wells right now. So expect oil to go up by the end of the year. People who produce grain, they want to be paid in real stuff.
Yes.
Like China now doesn't want to be paid in euros or dollars. They want grain, they want corn, they want real stuff, because they know that this is going to be needed in the very near future, because at least you can eat it. You cannot eat.
They're not stupid. They're not stupid. The Chinese. Nobody's ever accused them of being stupid.
No one has. So we are entering this phase. So I made a super long answer to your question, but basically, why am I doing this, and why I tell these people is counterintuitively because I want them not to be scared.
Right.
Because all I say is very scary, especially for people who learn this for the first time, who open their eyes and says, "Oh shit, this is true. We are at the edge of a cliff here, and that we are probably already starting to fall."
Yeah.
But and it is scary. But I actually want people to prepare and act and learn to be spiritually, physically. Ready is a big word. You can put a lot of things in the term semantically in to be ready. But people, I want them to be prepared. And that is a way not to be scared. And this is my end goal, for that people not to be in panic mode, in anxiety, in scare. And it's not easy. In fact, a lot of my readers tell me, I'm super anxious now. And I say, oh, that's not what I wanted. But let's work on that.
I would always say that, like, working in mental health, I've never been more optimistic. And people go, do you think it'll go back to normal? And I say, I fucking hope it doesn't. Suicide rates through the roof, obesity through the roof, drug use through the roof. There's misery out there. We have a chance here. We'll be losing a lot. We will be losing a lot. But maybe a lot of what we'll lose is crap that was only holding us back and was only holding us down. To this point about I live on a shipping lane. I could see the ships go by. And I was thinking, where do they park? Like, you've got to park the fuckers. And then 2 days ago, I was reading, with this oil crisis or this oil war that's been going on, some of the oil producers are now not charging customers to take the oil. They pay them to take the oil because it costs too much to hold it. They're like, we can't hold these barrels anywhere. Please take them from us. And I was thinking, when we met less than a year ago, and people were saying, oh, this is very pessimistic, it's too much. If you'd said to them, listen, inside of 8 months, the oil producers will pay you to take the barrels off them, it would have blown their hair back. But here we are. It's happening. Or perhaps this isn't the ultimate happening, as you say, of the cliff, but it's the first few bits of furniture dropping off.
Oh, yeah. I think it's like because when people say, do you expect a collapse to happen in a day or a week? And I say, no. This is like when you fall down from stairs. The first stair you fall down, the first you hit your head and you break a tooth, and then the next step you will break a shoulder, and then it's the leg, and then it's the arm, and you tumble down. So who could expect that the first crisis would be a pandemic? Now, pandemic was not expected. In fact, I wrote a book on pandemics 4 years ago. I have it here, on nuclear, which we hope don't happen, but it's out in English.
CBRN. And, what was the name of your international bestseller from 2010?
Survive the Economic Collapse.
Survive the Economic Collapse, folks. I'll put a link in the more information.
It's an excellent book, and this one was this is the latest that came out in English, which is on chemical, bacteriological, which includes pandemics, radiological, nuclear events. So what happens if the factory full of chemical stuff next to where you live blows up? Well, what can you do? What can you do before that? What you can do during? and if you survive, what you can do after. These are things that people should think about, especially as we live in cities where we have all these plants and people always imagine fancy nuclear explosions, but more prosaically, you have chemical plants in most cities. And in terms of the pandemics, what was interesting is that all the experts in the world were saying to everyone, say, look, it's overdue that we will have a big pandemic that will be quite deadly. Now, to be reasonable, deadly for a pandemic means 1% death, because we are in a way better hygienic and in a better shape in terms of society than we used to be during the when there was the cholera of the 19th centuries, or even the Spanish flu 100 years ago, or 6 centuries ago the Black Plague. We are in a much better position, even if we start to have these morbidities such as obesity, such as diabetes on a large scale, which will not help. And of course, we are much older as a population in average than we used to be. But it's in fact good news that viruses never kill more than 1 or 2% of the people, even the worst ones.
Right.
Because either they don't transmit very fast, like Ebola. Ebola kills a lot, but it's hard to catch. Or flu doesn't kill a lot, but it's very easy to catch. Or this one, which is a sort of weird one, which obviously is a very contagious one. But fortunately, of course, every death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is a statistic. So when you look at statistics, as Uncle Joe used to say, when you look at statistics, you find out that fortunately it's not such a dangerous epidemic, and yet we almost killed the economy for it because the protocols were not followed. And that's where the ideology crisis comes in, because the protocol is as follows: when you have a pandemic, you shut down the borders, you shut down the flights from the places where the pandemic starts, and every time you find someone who has the symptoms, you isolate that person. And then you check every person he has been in contact over the last few days. And if those person develop symptoms, you start the process again until there's no more symptoms and that process stops. You don't stop the full economy, but you have to isolate. Here, obviously it's not true. Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea did follow the protocol, and they have very little death. Right. But the rest of the world, they managed this. They did the worst. They opened the border long enough so that the thing could spread. And then they shut down everything, which actually doesn't stop anything, because you actually do spread it even when it's shut down, if only to the people you're with. So when now we restart, this thing is going to spread again. And again, we're lucky it's not a big killer. So we'll make it. In a medical point of view, this is a non-event anymore. But on an economic point of view, this is a disaster. It is probably one of those steps where we just broke our jaw or something.
It's the first. We're maybe on the first step down the tumble. I've been speaking to people because my whole thing from day one was our response is not proportionate to the threat. You're not a doctor. We don't understand the virus. And I was like, well, I don't think you understand what poverty does. I don't think you understand what destitution does. Absolutely. And there was this idea floating around that an economy can just be shut down, take a break for 8 weeks, open up, and everything's fine. And I'm like, if you're middle class and you have savings, but there's people who are not just living month to month. There's people living week to week. What are they doing right now? I think it'll be years if we get the chance to even figure out how many people died as a result of the economic shutdown.
And in parts of the world, and once again, every Westerner, even the poorest Westerner, is like middle class compared to a lot of places in the world.
Yes.
And in the world, you live day by day. You have a vast quantity of people who are paid. They get the payday every day. Every evening, they go to the boss, and the boss gives them 5 rupees or whatever. And that's enough to buy some bread and to put a little bit aside to pay the rent if there is a rent. Some people live on the railway lines or in the streets. So the economical disaster, which, if I want to be cynical, I would say, well, this is just history, destiny, whatever you call it, coming with the bill to say, well, you've done nonsense for the last 50 or 800 years, whatever.
Yeah.
Now here's the bill to pay.
Right.
And you're going to pay it with blood. And you're going to pay in reduction of people. And maybe the end result over the next 5 to 6 years of different stairs that we tumble down is going to be reduction of population by half. Could be. Because I can see the results. I can see, when people get angry, you have politicians saying, oh, it's these guys' fault, it's these guys' fault, it's people inside the minority, these guys, or it's this other country, look, Russia, or China, or whatever. And then you go to war, because war is a great way to have everyone focused on something else. It has always been. And I don't wish for that, by the way, of course. But I'm saying that there are chances that we don't come out from these things smarter. There are chances that we get blindfolded into some further disasters, and which everyone thinks is a good idea when they start, but then you end up with carpet bombs on your city and starvation and things like that. So there's a good chance that this is the beginning of a process. And I think that some opportunistic, very powerful people, I don't want to be going the way some people whose channel have been shut down recently, but there's a hypothesis, so I'm not blaming, I'm not saying names, I say there's a possibility that some people who are very opportunistic, who have their agenda, are using this crisis since the beginning. I actually think this is an engineered crisis, but I think there's been some opportunistic use of this crisis.
Okay, but you wouldn't go so far as to say they just flicked that first domino. You would say no.
I think that the pandemic did happen.
Okay.
I don't know how exactly, but I think it does happen. Some guy made a mistake. These things happen. But this is how I see it. I just make a short side note. But until February 15th, all the media, all of them, because they all speak with one voice all over the world, which is quite interesting. Well, then you discover who they are. They're owned by 6 companies, so of course, which themselves are owned by 100 people. So obviously, the voice is pretty unique. So all the media were saying, no, this is not a crisis. Keep shopping, keep the borders. Don't worry. It is nothing. It's a flu. And then around February 15th, 20th, they switched to, we're all going to die. And there was 25 deaths today. And then the next day, today, 30 deaths, 40 deaths. Every day they tell you, and this is how, and then when it became big enough, they say, oh, we have now reached 28,000 dead in the country, blah, 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 every day. So they scared everyone to hell. And I think they scared the politicians. Right. And the politicians had to do something drastic. Otherwise, they would be blamed as, oh, you did nothing.
Yeah.
And so I think the agenda piggybacked on this crisis, and now it's there. It's there, and it's and fortunately, a lot of people don't agree with that, and they say, well, okay, we understand now the risks. To be fair, we didn't know exactly how this virus was working or this Chinese cat rather, how it was working in January, early February when I started to follow this on January 20th. And I was looking, because I'm not a mystical guy. I like data. So I started to study and crunch the data, and it didn't make sense. I says, the Chinese are saying to us that there's like 500 people who are affected and there's 200 deaths. I mean, fucking hell, this is a lot. And then they tell us that the spread is like every guy spreads to 6 people every 2 weeks. So I take my calc and I multiply, every 2 weeks, multiply by 6. And then you're like, right, by June, there's like everyone on Earth who's got it. Yeah. And if the ratio is 20% death, fuck.
That's a big, yeah.
And started to crunch this down and said, no, it doesn't work. This is too much. A virus never does that. You can take all the history of virus, and I have all the history of all the epidemics in my books, and the statistics are much lower, always, every time. Now, bacteria is a different thing, because bacteria is a living being that wants to eat you. Now, or live within you, depends which ones. But the virus is a different thing. A virus doesn't want to kill you. He wants to reproduce. It's a different, or he wants to multiply. It's a different thing. And if sometimes you die, but most of the time you don't. Even Ebola is only 50% death, and it's probably the worst kind of virus you can think of.
Yeah.
So it didn't compute. So when you don't know, you have to be responsible. And on, I think, February 1st or 2nd, I live not too far from the World Health Organization, and I called some people who work there. I say, but guys, why aren't you saying to shut down the borders? Because this is the unknown is too big. Shutting down the borders without shutting down the economies would have been a fraction of the cost of what we're now.
Yes.
And they say, well, we can't, because if we give this kind of recommendation, there's too much economical impact. So they delayed, and eventually they had to go for something much worse. So it's been badly managed, but in truth, we didn't really know what. So they were careless at the beginning, and then they were way too harsh at the end. So we did the wrong
way around. You said there was an ideological element to this. Did they not close the borders because they're terrified of being accused of being racist?
Yeah. Well, first of all, open border is the way, right? Everyone should go everywhere. And also, if you close the border with China, that's racist with Chinese.
Right.
Don't call this the Chinese virus. Remember how they were calling this in early February?
Because I'm looking on flight radar every day. Because if I see a plane at the moment, we're in lockdown and I'm bored if I'm not working, I'll be like, what's that plane? And some of it is FedEx, some of it is DHL. A lot of passenger flights. Just yesterday, a passenger flight from Beijing arrives in Dublin. And I'm thinking, so, hang on. I'm told to stay in my house. I have to go out on Thursday and clap the NHS. I have to wear a mask. But there's people flying in from the source of the virus into Dublin every day.
I don't know. It's first of all, you don't know if the plane is full of people, because I actually have a good friend who works in shipping, and she told me that a lot of passenger flights who are flying now, they're almost empty of people, but they're full of goods, of cargo. Because
do you want to know a really weird coincidence? You mentioned a weird coincidence before we started talking. Maybe like in February time, I was talking to a female friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine, and we got into this conversation about moving goods. And she said, well, there's oranges in Spain and you don't have good oranges here in the UK. So why don't they fly it in? And I said, well, because it's too expensive. You just can't do that. It doesn't, you have to ship it. It doesn't make sense. You have to truck it. That's how it works. And then we got into this whole thing and I was like, I wonder if you could fly, like what's the economics of flying goods in? So you think some of these passenger planes would just be full of goods?
Actually, many planes have been refurbished. Some of them, they just simply put the crates on the seats and they fly it because it's cheaper. Yeah. There's a fixed cost with not flying, and there's a cost with not flying the plane.
Sure.
So they probably lose money on every flight, but they lose less than if the plane is idle on an airport somewhere. Right. So they have to, they have to go cost and benefit and say, wait, we'll be bankrupt only in 6 months if we ship. Whereas if we don't, we'll be bankrupt in 6 months.
We're laughing, but it's like people need to understand that's how it actually works.
Yeah.
Everybody's just trying to kick the can down the road. Another 6 months. Can we last another 12 months? And this sort of phase of capitalism we're in, correct me if I'm wrong, that's how it works. We're getting by year to year. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very, in a way, it's very adaptive. And in a way, it's a good news that they can adapt fast like this. But I'm actually wondering, because because I understand in Asia, and I did watch this flight radar website, and there's quite a lot of flights within China, for example.
Yeah.
Not a lot of flights elsewhere. And when I look at them, I have to. Who's actually flying right now? Who actually? Because no one is planning or going on holiday with plane. Where would you go? And I don't even know physically if you're allowed to go to the airport and say I want to leave. I'm not sure you actually can. But who would go from China to Dublin and Dublin to China? I cannot even imagine, because is there anything that you actually require the physical presence of someone Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you need someone to repair a leaking nuclear reactor in China. Yeah, you send the expert. Okay.
When I asked 6 weeks ago about all the flights between the UK and America, because I want to see my sister, she's in America. I'm not allowed to go. It says on the website only diplomats can go. So I asked the question. I called up. I was like, "Well, who's flying?" And they said they're diplomats. And I was like, "Fucking hundreds of diplomats every day are filling these planes."
I don't think there's many.
No, I don't think it can't.
So it has to be very specific people. Which also, what you said earlier is true. One of the consequences of this is that we are discovering that there's a lot of jobs who are not necessary.
Oh God, yeah. Well, what about the hospitals? We're getting by without people filling the hospitals every day. So that says to me, the hospitals are full of people just going because they're bored or they're lonely, or it's not life and death, obviously.
Yeah, of course. And then there is all the administration that is not needed. There is all the people who seem to live doing meetings in companies, whether public or private. So suddenly you start to realize that maybe 40, 50% of the jobs are not necessary.
Yeah. That the world's full of non-essential workers.
You think the CEOs of corporations will hire them back? I don't think so.
Well, capitalism dictates that you couldn't do that. I mean, it's not a fucking charity at the end of the day.
And so we are basically cornered our global civilization, because it's just funny when I have some African friends who at the beginning of this crisis say, this is only hitting whites, not blacks, haha. Well, it seems to hit everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So we have cornered the global civilization into, when you paint yourself into the corner, and now you say, oh shit, that's it. We're too many. We're not skilled. We just went along with a salary for bullshit jobs, for a bullshit life, and I think you're right. Eventually, this has to be a wake-up call for civilization and for people to say, hold on a second, what is our life and civilization about? I mean, when I was a kid, we dreamed to go to the stars and colonize the universe, and at least it was a dream. Now the dream is what? Live to 60 then get some payment, have a cruise once in a while, and be with nagging wife or husband for the rest. I mean,
shit.
This is not glorious. This is not the dream. This is nothing. This is at least people in the past, they had this idea of living in a free world, and we're not free anymore. They had this idea of having a nice retirement. There's not going to be any retirement. They had this idea that they could see their standard of living growing. Well, how many plasma TVs do you want to buy anyway? And for more people, forget it. There's not going to be money for that anyway. And soon there's not going to be resources to build all that. So either we go into the nihilistic war rage that say, well, fuck with everything. We throw everything in the war on the floor, and we fight for the sake of fighting, and we'll find the usual minority that we exterminate. We'll find the neighbor that we don't like, that speaks a weird language that we try to make war with, and we self-annihilate through that to an equilibrium point. Yeah. That's a possibility. Yeah. Or we get our act together and we actually say, well, guys, this is not what, we have to change spiritually first.
Yeah.
But it's not easy because there's always the people who will sell us the snake oil, the snake oil salesman who will say, hey, I have a great idea. It's called communism or whatever, or nationalism or whatever. Yeah. And it doesn't matter the idea. The idea is that let me rule over you for your good.
Yes.
And this has been going on since Caesar, since the popes, since the kings, and this is always with us, that temptation to give all the responsibility to that powerful group or guy or ideology or church or whatever. Yeah. And we have to be very careful because the technology they have now enables, imagine the East German Stasi with Facebook and the data collection they have now. They would have an orgasm right there and then, whereas they had to actually physically listen to people and bug the phones. They had, labor-intensive work to try to find out the guy who said, well, maybe socialism is not that great, and before getting him, arresting him, and getting him. Now they know everything about you.
Yeah. Saves
So,
time on torture. You don't need to torture the information out of people. You just check their Facebook.
but remember, it's for your own good.
Yeah.
That's key.
So what I said before, I brushed over the fact that as well as people not going into hospitals to work and visiting hospitals for stupid reasons, people are now not visiting hospitals when they have cancer, when they have sepsis, when they have broken bones because of fear, the
Yeah.
fear of the virus. You know a lot more about this than I do. I mean, are you personally afraid of catching the virus? Is it something that you concern yourself with?
No, because once again, I crunched the numbers, and when you look at the statistics, first of all, in life,
Mm.
the point of life, and it's not something that I expect young people to learn and know, but from Plato to now, all philosophers figured out that the point of life is to prepare a good death.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that you have to be personally prepared to die any time. The Romans would say, memento mori, remember that you will die. It's very important. Because if you don't have that, you don't have carpe diem. You cannot enjoy the day if you don't understand that you're going to die. And by die, we actually mean not the physical necessarily death, but it's decay. I need glasses now to read my fucking phone, and we are decaying little by little. And this is the slow death of life, which starts when you're like 30, and that accelerates. And of course, you need to have, like the Red Queen, you need to exercise more every day just to stay a little bit the same, and so on and so on. And in the end, you lose. But that's okay, because you can enjoy life by doing carpe diem.
Mm-hmm.
And I just add the thing that, and you prepare the future for you, for your kids, for society.
Yeah.
So these three things enables you to actually limit the fear. Now, fear, I'm writing a book on fear right now.
Mm-hmm.
Fear is a very useful emotion.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's wired into our brain because there are good reasons to be scared when a big cat wants to eat you, which used to happen a lot for millions of years to our kind. And so when you see something that looks like a big cat, you get terrorized. You either freeze or you run or you climb or you find the solution. But usually your brain is hardwired to decide for you. You don't have time to decide. Suddenly you find yourself running because you've seen that cat or actually that snake or something like that. There's a lot of now neurological data that confirms everything on how it works, really on the detail. However, the problem is when fear becomes long-term. So you're not fearing for the cat, you're fearing for losing your job, you're fearing for, indeed, catching an illness.
Yeah.
And that fear can become chronic and can become debilitating in the long run. And then it actually hits your health. It destroys your immune system. And in fact, what was interesting is that I'm wondering, when I see all the news since February telling us about how we should be scared of here and there, I've yet to hear a news, mainstream news, talking about how you increase your metabolic and immune system.
Yeah.
This is what I've been doing with my kids since February. I've been force feeding them fresh orange juice and freshly squeezed every morning, and vitamin and zinc and vitamin D. And we go outside to the sun as soon as we can, just to make sure that they have the potential of the maximum potential. So I manage fear among many techniques. One of the techniques is to act. If you act, you reduce the statistics. So I have a mathematician mind, even if not necessarily good in math, but I look at the statistics. Say, this illness is probably touching, out of the people who are getting infected, you probably get 20% of people who actually have symptoms, who feel something, maybe a fever. And out of those 20%, maybe 5% really get into trouble.
Yeah.
And 99% of those 5% are people who are 70 and older.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm less than 50. I'm fairly okay in terms of fitness. I walk every day. I can run. I can lift weights. I eat well. I'm a bit fat, but that's okay. I'm not obese. So yeah, I shouldn't be scared. Okay. Now, I should play the game. When they say stay confined, okay, I stay confined. I'm lucky I live in a farm, so for me, confinement is like I have 100 square kilometers around me where I can run and walk. And okay, But certainly, I put the chances on my side not to be scared.
Right.
Now, if I was living poor in a small apartment in town with a nagging wife and horrible children, I'm putting everything together. That's going to be different, and the stress levels will probably increase my chances to, and especially if we had ballet. I was mentioning my African friends. Black Americans or Black European, Black Europeans don't exist. Black people living in Europe, they have 4 times the death rate than whites. Well, because they don't metabolize vitamin D, and because being on average, once again, I don't want to generalize, but on average, being in the lower social classes where the health care is and the self-care is not as important, and also the food is not as nutritious and full of vitamins.
Did you say 4 times as many? Four times the death rate is 4 times higher?
It is still very low. On total, it's still very low. But
that's an incredible statistic, though.
It is very high. It is very high. Wait a second. It doesn't mean that there are, for every one white old man that dies, there is 4 black.
Right.
It means that compared to the number of population, for example, in the US, 9% of the population is African in origin or partially African.
Yeah.
Well, then that 9%, if it were 100% equal to the whites, it would be 4 times higher.
It's a per head calculation.
Per head calculation. So you have 4 times more chances to die if you are. But that's enormous. That's still an enormous.
Huge.
It's not 1.1. It's 4.
Yeah.
400% times more. 4 times. And so it's vitamin D. It's the food. And so instead of saying, oh, it's racist society, it has nothing to do with that. You have to question, why are we if you're a black guy living in Europe or in America, why are you in a place where the sunshine is not adapted to your skin color, or rather the opposite, in fact, because sunshine is not adapting to anyone. It's the other way around.
I wish it would.
Is our society that feeds you with chips and Coke and Coca-Cola and perhaps crack as well, is it the right way to live? And maybe you should say, hold on a second. I live in big cities, everyone together, in a society that obviously doesn't give a lot of chances to a lot of people because, and it's contracting. It's not going to get better. Could it be nice to actually, and I know some people who did this. That's why I'm telling the story. People who many years ago said, I'm not going to live in Paris in some horrible suburbs full of people and burglaries and crime, and I'm going to go back to Africa, and I'm going back to Senegal, and I'm going to build an organic farm, and I'm going to make this farm. First of all, I can eat what I produce and live off the land, and secondly, I have markets of organic African food across the world, and if the economy goes okay, I export good food, great quality food, which I make myself with my friends and my families. And, it's a small farm, not huge, but they still produce enough. And if the economy goes to hell, hey, I can eat from my own produce and I can keep producing enough to feed me and my family. Yeah. This is better than living in the suburbs, going to do some not interesting jobs. The guy was in IT and whatever. Why do you need it anyway? Soon it's going to be AI or robots who are going to do these jobs. So the guy said, I'm leaving. I'm going to where the sun shines, so it's good for my skin. It's good for my health. I have organic food and produce. So the thing is, we have to think beyond the narration, and you have to think beyond this silly, in this case, is the narration of, oh, it's racism, all this bullshit in reality. There is racism, of course. It does exist, and I see it on all sides.
But that's not killing people who end up in hospitals with this Chinese cat.
And it's usually an excuse for not doing what is necessary. And this is what I want to have people to act. That's what I was saying about action is an antidote to fear and anxiety. Is that when you act, first of all, you're busy. You don't have your mind saying, oh, maybe I come ill. And what if I have? Because you can see, I'm sure you know people who are like that. Every time there is a news article that says, oh, this Chinese cat could potentially touch children with Kawasaki disease or whatever,
Right.
People get scared. I get scared. I say, I have children. I say, well, what the fuck is this Kawasaki disease? And I go and look and I say, okay, Kawasaki disease is like 2 cases per million. And then they say could. So it means that there has one guy who had this, one child who had this disease, who also had this virus.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean there's causality.
No, and the headline you just gave us is not going to sell as well. Kawasaki disease kills your kids. That's going to sell papers. What you said is one guy did this under these circumstances. Nobody's going to read that.
Exactly. And so the thing is, you have to be very wary and skeptical of the information you receive. And I say to everyone, including my readers, I say, don't believe me. Check the data. Think for yourselves. This is the only way you can manage your destiny, is if you think for yourself and you analyze stuff. And then, yes, you use your feelings. Your intuition is very important. And my intuition told me that this is, even at the beginning, my mind was telling me this could be dangerous, but I don't have enough data to be sure. But my gut feeling, my intuition was to say, well, don't care. This is nothing. Yeah. But I listened to my mind. Yeah. And in fact, I was right, because you don't know. Because we have to be very careful to have a confirmation bias. If you feel something, then you will find data that confirm what you feel or what you think. And this is a mistake. So you have to dig. But once you find compelling evidence that the risk is manageable, then you manage it.
Okay. Just to double back on that, were you saying that is this confirmed medical research that the black people living up in the northern hemisphere in low light conditions all have vitamin D deficiency? Is this a thing?
Well, first of all, there's a physiological thing, and which is absolutely backed by all the empirical evidence and scientific research. And in fact, pharmaceutical companies produce and medication for specific ethnicities across the world. It's only in the news that we're all the same. I mean, any scientists know that we are different, and good for it. I think it's amazing that we have adapted, people who have adapted to high altitude, low altitude, lot of sunlight, less sunlight. Indeed, what makes the skin darker is melanin. Melanin is a barrier that protects your skin for sunlight. It's a great thing. I mean, it's much better to have dark skin in the tropics and equator regions than to have white skin. Ask the Australians with their skin cancer epidemic. It's just the way it is. White people, I was telling this to my kids the other day, when Europeans got into Africa, I worked in Africa a lot, the life expectancy of Europeans in Africa was 6 months. Because, it was 6 months. Before antibiotics and anti-malaria drugs, white people were living on average 6 months, and then they died once in Africa because we're not adapted to malaria.
How did they sell people ongoing if they had a 6 month life expectancy?
Imagine how desperate people were in Scotland and England and France at the times. Yeah. I guess they sold them on women. I don't know. They say, hey, I don't know. But it was a disaster. It was that they never tell us in school that white people died in mass while they were going in Africa. Horses don't survive in Africa. They get killed by malaria like this. Really? Of course, now we have medication, but until 1920, it was tough. It was tough. Actually, anti-malaria is 1870, I think, the drug. But it was very tough. It was very tough. So we have adaptation, and the skin color protects us from skin. The caveat is that because it creates this filter, sunlight is needed to generate vitamin D with the fat within human fat. So if you have this dark color, which is great for protecting you from the sun, if you move to areas where the sun is less intense, especially in the winter, then you have deficiency of vitamin D. And vitamin D is super important for all the functions, especially liver. And in fact, you actually see that if you look at the number of cancers and liver dysfunctions in America, you find a huge disproportion of African Americans. And I don't make the rules. It's the way it works. Just as you find a disproportional amount of white people in tropical areas in Africa, in South America, in Australia, that have skin cancer. Do you know many African people of African origins that have skin cancer?
Mm-mm.
No, there are other things. So this is the way nature tells us: be careful with the adaptation over millennia and tens of millennia. We have off-balanced that in 2 centuries. Okay, so now we have to adapt, and we're paying the price. But what was the point again of that?
No, the reason why I asked you, there was 2 reasons. When I heard some of the stats, but I didn't know it was general. I thought it was just New York, and the stats came out 2 weeks ago, and they didn't say 4 times. They said 2 times. You're 2 times. If you go in and you end up you get your diagnosis, you will die. You're 2 times more likely to die if you're black. Indeed, I was speaking to a black friend of mine in New York, and as I was talking to her via Skype, her grandmother passed away during our conversation. Somebody called.
That's fast.
And I was thinking, yeah, I went to nutrition. I was like, maybe it's a nutritional thing. So,
I mean, you add the factors. If you have the vitamin D problem, and you add bad nutrition, too much fat, too much, and we know that the black people in America are in the less favorized stratus of population. Not all, but therefore the nutrition is the worst, unfortunately, because the food is. I've been into Washington D.C. black neighborhoods, and I see 90% obese people eating chips and Coke.
It's the same here. It's the same here in Liverpool and Birkenhead. It's a low education. People don't know about nutrition. They don't give a shit, and they're eating pizzas and kebabs and drinking loads of alcohol every weekend. People are fat, they're pasty, they're unhealthy, and they die younger. But they're not dying of the Chinese cat. So I was like, no, it can't be the nutrition. So you just filled in the gap, which is the vitamin D deficiency. And then my brain goes to, I wonder if there's mental health issues. Like if we're saying everybody who's black who lives in the Northern Hemisphere has vitamin D deficiency, are there other issues, emotional, psychological, that could come from that? It's a whole other
Could be,
thing.
and I think it's a fascinating science, and any scientist who wants to study that will probably get expelled from the scientific community because of because we're supposed to be all the same, which is nonsense, and we're not. There's no this is when you have this kind of discussion, and I can guarantee you that there's going to be comments saying, "Oh, that's racist." No, racist means to claim superiority, no matter what. Now, superiority exists within people, within individuals. I mean, some people are taller, so they're superiorly, highly endowed than others. Some people are smaller, some people are faster, some people are smarter, and so on. We're not equal. We're all different, and which is great. If we were all equal, I would not like my girlfriend.
Right.
It was the same as me. It would be disgusting.
I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't want to bring it up. Your girlfriend would have something to say about you.
Well, at least so we are different, and this is great. This is what makes the world. When I go to Indonesia, I see some amazing different people and culture. When the Indonesians comes to here, they see a different and amazing culture from them, and so this is great. And all these politics that have been created, granted, there's been some shit done over history, but we can learn from that. And I didn't do it, so I don't feel guilt. And the people who could blame me, they didn't suffer from it, so I don't accept any blame from them. Yeah. So if we take away all this shit, we can focus on the real problems. When the real problem is how we get better prepared, how we get in better health to manage the tsunami of problems that is happening right now. And we are only seeing the beginning. Right now we see the sea, retreating. Yeah. And we start to see the bubbles growing up on the horizon, and the tsunami is coming. And some people are on the beach trying to discuss what kind of swimsuit should you have. Let's have
It won't matter when that tsunami hits.
And some people, like I'm trying to do, are running from the hills to the house they're prepared, and telling to other people, follow me, because this is where we're going to be safer. But this requires hard work. This requires, of course, to change our habits, maybe not to waste your time in silly jobs. Okay, sometimes you need the money, so you need the silly job for a while, but you need to plan a change of your life. So I don't want to end up into the what is this field in America of personal enhancement? What is the name in English of this field of
personal development?
yeah, this personal development thing.
Like, yeah.
But there's a bit of that. There's a bit of that. At some point, we need to shake ourselves away from all the indoctrination and the habits. As simply put, the habits that we've built over years. Some people are young, they have 5 or 10 years of habits. Some people are older, they have 20, 30, 40 years of habits. And we have to shake it off and just challenge those and say, is it really that A, makes me happy, B, gives me meaning, which is usually the same thing, 3, enables me to have a meaningful and actually a life alone, if only a survival for the future. Because the way this thing is going, this is going to be a natural selection at play in the next few years.
Right.
And natural selection is very cruel. It gives no hugs. It gives you no second or third chance. It really is, are you at the right place at the right time? There's an element of luck, but there's an element of preparation. And we should look at this in a very cold and analytical way and not be scared, or just the right way, because fear gives us that kick in the butt to make us move. But it shouldn't paralyze us. So it's that fine equilibrium that we need to find. And you usually find it when you have good health, good spiritual mind. And I'm not saying religion, even if it could be religion. I mean, people who have religious, they have a track of morals and of, which is really helpful, unless you're an Aztec and you believe that the god is coming from the Western Sea, and in fact he comes to take your gold and kill you.
He comes to kill you, enslave you.
In most cases, in fact, religion helps you. I'm not religious at all. I'm an atheist, but I start to develop a lot of spirituality to provide the philosophical base for ethics, without which you unfortunately can't build that. And I suggest people who watch us to check out Stefan Moliner's talks on ethics. It's very interesting. And we need to develop these secular ethics, which are above the laws of the land, which are above the emotions that we may or may not have, because we need those guidelines. And if we don't have them, it's very difficult to do everything else. So all of this combines into the struggle for life, which has been around forever, and that it's going to be challenging in the next decade.
If there probably is going to be a second wave of the pandemic come October, November time, what advice would you give to people preparing for that?
Well, what we wrote in the book, because this book on pandemics, I actually interviewed experts of every field, because I'm not an expert on nuclear energy or nuclear warfare or bacteriological preparation and something like that. So I actually co-wrote the book with the specialists of those fields for the French from the French Special Forces, which have a cell for dealing with those kind of emergencies. And when we discussed and wrote the book, we told exactly that question: what can people do to prepare for it? Well, now we are basically guaranteed that this virus is going to go across the people over the next year, for sure. And we're all going to catch it eventually, and the people who are best prepared. So, number one, I would say boost your immune system as much as you can. Of course, this is the first and last protection that you need to have is your own body. And that means that, exercise, get good cardio, perhaps lose a bit of weight if you have too much, like me, and certainly put in your body the right fuel, which is the best food you can. And if you can't have good foods, go on fast a lot to boost your immune system, and try to maybe eat less, but eat better food, better. Don't eat meat every day. Yeah. Eat it once a week, but have the best meat you can get. And I'm not just talking steak. I'm talking liver, heart, or something else. Now here we have all the vegans that are super upset. But I said it: eat less meat, but eat the best. Eat less cheese, but eat the best.
So you don't eat meat every day?
No, not every day.
Oh, okay. Just for your health, you don't do it?
No, I don't need it. I like good salad most of the days, and I also, I try to eat what I produce in my garden. So I don't produce a lot of meat. I have eggs quite often from the chickens, and I would say the sheep of my neighbor, but we don't usually eat them. They keep reproducing and growing in number and planning and plotting against us probably to take over. But have the best vegetables and lots of them. Vegetables, fruits. For example, you want vitamin C? Eat cabbage. Cabbage is full, and persil, full of vitamin C. And if you're really wondering, go check a specialist. Go to a nutritionist. These guys know what usually they know their stuff. They will tell you, because if you ask people what should I eat, people would say, oh, eat a little bit of everything. That means nothing. And that so
it includes kebabs, pizzas, crisps, chocolate, that's a little bit of everything.
For example, bread is not good for me, and I'm originally Italian, so my mother makes a killer of a pasta. But that's every time I eat a plate of pasta, I take 5 kilos. It's horrible. So it's not good for me. I need to eat vegetables. I need to eat raw vegetables. I like have your raw cucumbers and tomatoes and exercise. Okay, so you do all that, and if you really want to push it, have a blood sample test. And they will say, oh, you are lacking vitamin D, or you're lacking this or that. And then you can supplement, of course. And you ask me why some black people in America are doing okay. Well, the wealthy ones, the people who understand that, they supplement.
Right.
So see, if I didn't like them, I wouldn't say to supplement. I would say, don't supplement. No, don't.
If you didn't like them, you'd be in trouble with your girlfriend. That's all I'm going to say. I've met her. She's a very nice lady, but I'm sure she'd be giving you a slap. When you mentioned that, there was an MMA fighter years ago called Anderson Silva, and he was training. He left Brazil, where obviously it's really hot and sunny, to go and train up in America for 6 months. And he did a fight, and he kicked somebody, and his leg snapped, wrapped around the other guy's leg. And it was actually Alex Jones was saying, it's a vitamin D deficiency. The black people in America, they can't get. And I was like, what the? Shut up, Alex. Shut up. This is nonsense. That he just has a genetic. And actually now I'm like, okay, all right, I'll give it to Alex Jones on that one. He was right.
Yeah, he's often right, which is scary.
Yeah.
And
also, I was just going to mention with people who smoke. Obviously, this is the thing that attacks the lungs. But I was a smoker. The smoking actually strips vitamin D and C from your system as well, doesn't it? So if people are trying to smoke and drink all the time, they're really, really bringing their immune system down.
Now, of course, I cannot comment on that because that's beyond my knowledge. And on the other hand, you read scientists who say, well, actually, nicotine has a positive effect against this particular virus. Because probably it's so toxic that it also kills the virus in your blood, because it's so that's what I would say. The first thing that everyone can do is try to boost your immune system. It can be done very fast. Add a few lemon juice, fresh squeezed lemon juice a day. Over a month, you're already boosting your vitamin C levels. For example, it's very simple to do. As long as you still have lemons, and then you have to go on cabbage and other things if you can't. But squeezed cabbage juice is less nice than lemon. Then what we also say in the books is really to say, well, what if you need to be confined? And we were planning for that scenario in the book 4 years ago. We say, if you have to be confined because there is a strange and very aggressive killing virus around, well, do you have enough water? Do you have enough food in your house to last for 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 weeks? That's a long time, 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Because we've been lucky this time that the shops were open. But if that virus was a 20% killer, which is impossible, But let's say it was engineered in that way. Then the shops are closed, all of them, and you have to stay home, all of you. Well, that's a different game. That's really, really, really bad. Well, it was one of the things that you were on my mind the whole time that this was kicking off,
when I'd go to the supermarket and the shelves were full. Well, they dropped a little bit. And I was like, yeah, that's the truck drivers, that's the people who work in the shops. We're all clapping the fucking nurses and doctors. I'm like, what about the people who keep food in your mouths? Like it's well, we'll see. We'll see. I hope it's not much worse the next time round, and who knows, perhaps they'll even.
Who knows? The next time around can be something different. Next time around can be an oil shock, because now that the oil producers are dropping the capacity to produce and the capacity of storage, because maybe 6 months from now, 1 year from now, when the economy finally starts again, the oil prices become too high, and then the trucks can't support the deliveries and so on. So you who knows? Or maybe it's the inflation. Inflation drives all the prices to be so high that people can't afford them. Therefore, a second batch of business goes into bankruptcy. Therefore, trucks don't deliver as much as before, and then you have social unrest, and you have to stay home for 2 or 3 weeks because of social unrest. You don't want to go into the street and get mugged, or get shot by the army. Who knows? Well, then, think ahead, have enough water, or filter the water, have some. All of this I explain in my books in detail, and I give the process and the data on to do it. But this is the ways to think ahead of the potential problems. And the way I did it on all my books is to, once again, I have this rational mind where I say, what is the common denominator? What is the common thing that we all need, whatever happened, whether it's a nuclear war or economic crisis, or if you get dumped by your wife and you end up unemployed or whatever. Whatever happens, you need some water, you need some food, you need to maintain your hygiene. You need a little bit of energy to make whatever you need to work. You need knowledge, you need competences, skills. You need to defend yourself, and you need the social bonds with other people that can help you and that you can help them. Sure. This is the 7 things that all of us need in life. Whether it's a normal life, in which case most of these things are provided by the infrastructure and by society at large, or if things are not normal anymore because there's a crisis, well, you have to be able to provide them either on your own or with your network of close friends and family. Sure. Well, everyone should look around himself or herself and say, do I have enough on those 7 things? Yeah. And maybe you have 2 or 3, maybe you have 1, maybe you have 0, maybe you have all of them. But make an appraisal of what is your ability, not just for you, but for your family and the people who depend on you. And also, I should add, because people always say, "Oh, this is selfish." No, it's not selfish. Of the people around you, because I've had, for example, I had lots of face masks during this crisis, and at the beginning of the crisis, I figured out that now we're going to be confined in the farm, so we stay in a nice place. We don't need them, so I have maybe 200. So I kept 50 just in case, and I took 150 and I brought them to the local hospital. Say, you guys seem to need it, and certainly you will need them in the next 2 weeks. Here you go. And they say, thank you. It was not a medical crisis in Switzerland, but it could have been. So at least they have it. So the idea is that you can help others, and I don't send me a medal for that. It's nothing. But if you have food stored at home, and there is a crisis, and you have suddenly 1 or 2 weeks without food in supermarkets, which is a terrible crisis. Well, don't just wait for, the government will come and help us. No, it won't. Well, maybe you can help your neighbors. So your neighbor, instead of being desperate and trying to mug you, you give him a little bit of the extra food you have, so that suddenly he's your friend, or maybe you can work something together. Maybe you can catch the water in the building you live in together and filter it, because you have a filter, and you can provide drinkable, clean water to the whole building. Whatever, whatever the scenario. So people say, oh, but this is wow, you're thinking of Mad Max stuff. No, this is not Mad Max. We don't drive with V8 engines in the streets. we don't do that, especially with low oil production. But we don't get to dress in leather straps. Yeah, I know. There's some bad elements to every crisis. So But however, what remains is help your neighbor and create the connection. And by the way, it's better to start now to have the good connection with your neighbor and your families and extended families, because when the crisis is tough, building rapport and building relationship is harder. So
yeah, definitely. Where can people find you if they want to know more about your work, sir?
Sure. Well, my website is piero.com. I have a YouTube channel which is mostly in French, but some English videos there. And my books can be found on Amazon in English, and of course in many other languages. But I presume most of the people who, like, the Polish version is just coming out, and the Turkish came out as well. But English is fine. You'll find my books in English, most of them.
Perfect. I'll put some of the information that you've given in the more information bar. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
We'll speak again.
Cheers.